Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are not just looking at a topic. We are standing on the edge of a precipice.
That's a good way to put it.
We are looking down into the engine room of human decision-making, the very machinery that tells us right from wrong. And honestly, it is a lot messier down there than I expected.
It is indeed. We often like to think of our moral compass as this fixed magnetic thing.
Yeah, simple.
It points north, we follow it, end of story. But when you actually open up the casing, which is what we're doing today, you realize that north is something we have to calculate.
Over and over.
Over and over. And depending on which formula you use, north can move.
Exactly. We are talking about the kind of hard choices that, they keep you up at night.
For sure.
And I don't mean what should I have for dinner, although, interestingly enough, our sources today do have a surprising amount to say about ice cream.
They really do.
I mean, the classic tension. Isn't action right because it produces a good result right now, in this second? Or is it right because it follows a rule that, generally speaking, keeps the world from burning down?
That is the fundamental tension.
Yeah.
And to navigate it, we are doing a deep dive into utilitarianism.
Right.
But we aren't just skimming the surface of the greatest good for the greatest number. We are stepping into the ring for the heavyweight bout of moral philosophy. Act utilitarianism versus rule utilitarianism.
A battle for the soul of ethics. And our mission today is pretty specific. We want to navigate this landscape without giving ourselves a migraine, which is a tall order with philosophy.
A very tall order.
And figure out, should we be judging our actions case by case, like a lone wolf improvising in the wild? Or should we stick to the code no matter what?
And I want to stress right off the bat, this influences everything. This isn't just people in tweed jackets arguing in a library.
No, this is real-world stuff.
This logic underpins how we write laws, how we construct economic policy, and fundamentally, how we trust our neighbors. If you don't understand the distinction between act and rule, you miss a huge part of how our society functions.
So we have a massive stack of sources today. We've got entries from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. We have deep analysis on John Stuart Mill. We have some really technical but fascinating stuff from Brad Hooker on something called rule consequentialism.
And insights on R.M. Hare. It's a lot.
It's a lot, but we're going to distill it.
It is a rich stack.
Yeah.
We are going to see how this theory evolved from, a simple pleasure counter to a complex system that tries to account for human psychology and social trust.
But before we get to the theory, let's start with a story.
Okay.
A scenario found in our sources, specifically from the philosopher J.J.C. Smart. And it is, well, it's a lot. I want you to imagine it's 1938.
Okay, 1938.
You are walking by a river. It's cold. The current is fast. You see a man drowning. You don't know who he is. You just see a fellow human in distress flailing in the water.
Instinct kicks in.
Right. You jump in, you fight the current, you pull him out, you save his life. You are shivering, he's coughing up water. You are a hero.
Right? You would certainly feel like one. The adrenaline is pumping, you've done a good deed.
But then, you towel him off, look at his face, brush the hair out of his eyes, and realize you just saved Adolf Hitler.
Oh, wow.
So the question is, did you do the right thing? In 1938, did you commit a moral good or a moral evil?
It is a brutal question because your intuition screams two different things.
Completely opposite things.
Saving a life is good, but saving a genocidal dictator is bad.
And the fascinating thing is, the answer depends entirely on which version of utilitarianism you subscribe to. It is the perfect litmus test to show why this distinction between act and rule matters so much.
It really is.
But to answer it, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to understand the machinery before we can judge the output.
Exactly. We need to lay the foundation.
So section 1, the foundation. Pleasure, pain, and pigs.
Let's do it.
Before we split the atom, give me the elevator pitch for utilitarianism in general. What is the core DNA here?
The elevator pitch is deceptively simple. It falls under the umbrella of consequentialism.
Right. Consequences. It's in the name.
As the name suggests, the morality of an action is determined solely by its consequences, not by the intention, not by the character of the person doing it, but by the result.
Just the outcome.
Just the outcome. If the effects are good, the act is right. If the effects are bad, the act is wrong.
So no thou shalts, no intentions matter, just the scoreboard at the end of the game.
Precisely. And for utilitarians, the score is measured in a very specific way, maximizing good and minimizing bad.
Okay.
And classically, good means pleasure or happiness, and bad means pain or unhappiness.
This brings us to the grandfather of the movement, Jeremy Bentham, When I read about him, he struck me as a guy who really wanted to turn ethics into a hard science.
He absolutely did. Jeremy Bentham was the quantity guy. He looked at this mathematically. He wanted to identify the greatest happiness for the greatest number.
That's the famous line.
It is. And for Bentham, pleasure was pleasure. It didn't matter where it came from. If the quantity of pleasure was the same, then the game of pushpin, a simple child's game, was just as good as poetry.
I love that. He's basically saying, don't be a snob.
Yeah.
If people like reality TV more than Shakespeare, then reality TV is morally superior because it creates more happiness.
In a way, yes. I mean, he was radically impartial, and that impartiality is key.
So how did he measure it? He didn't just guess, right?
No, he developed what he called the philosophic calculus.
The happiness calculator.
He literally thought you could calculate the intensity, duration, certainty, and propinquity, how soon it will happen of pleasure.
It sounds exhausting to live like that. Honey, should we go to the movies?
Hold on.
Hold on, let me get my abacus and calculate the duration and intensity of the popcorn.
It is exhausting, but the core insight is radical equality. The Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy gives a great analogy for this using ice cream. It really nails the math of it.
Yes, the party planning scenario. This really helped me get my head around the ruthlessness of the math.
It's a great example.
So let's play this out. Imagine I am buying ice cream for a party of 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
I have to choose a flavor. Now, personally, I love vanilla. I am a diehard vanilla guy. I hate chocolate.
A controversial stance, but for the sake of the argument, go on.
I know. But here's the rub. 7 people at the party love chocolate. Only 3, including me, like vanilla.
Right.
If I am being a true utilitarian, what do?
You buy the chocolate, no question.
Even though I hate it. Even though I'm the one paying for it. Even though I'm the one driving to the store.
Exactly. The utilitarian math doesn't care whose money it is. It calculates the total pleasure.
So 7 happy chocolate eaters beats 3 happy vanilla eaters.
It does. 7 people liking chocolate outweighs 3 people liking vanilla. Your own personal preference counts for nothing more than anyone else's.
It's just 1 vote out of 10.
Just one. As Bentham famously put it, every man to count for one, nobody for more than one.
So I have to suffer through a bowl of chocolate. Or no ice cream at all for the greater good.
You do. Impartiality demands it. You are essentially a spectator to your own decision, weighing everyone's happiness equally. You are just one vessel for happiness among 10 vessels.
That feels cold. Fair, but cold.
It is the logic of a benevolent administrator. But then comes John Stuart Mill, and he throws a wrench in the gears.
He does.
He says, wait a minute, not all pleasures are created equal.
Right. Mill is the student who surpasses the master. He introduces the idea of qualitative hedonism. Why did he feel the need to complicate things?
Well, he was worried that Bentham's view made humans look like, well, pleasure-seeking animals.
Philosophy for swine, I think, was the criticism.
That was the exact phrase. If it's just about raw sensation, intensity, and duration, then a pig rolling in the mud, perfectly fed and warm, might be happier than a tortured artist or a philosopher struggling with existential dread. Is the pig's life better?
And Mill says no, absolutely not.
Mill says absolutely not. He distinguishes between lower faculties, bodily sensations, eating, sleeping, the stuff we share with animals, and higher faculties.
The brainy stuff.
Intellect, imagination, moral sentiments, the appreciation of beauty. And he argues that the pleasures from the higher faculties are vastly superior in kind, not just amount.
This leads to that famous quote, which is honestly one of the best burns in philosophy history.
It's an all-timer. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied.
It is a powerful statement. But isn't it also a bit convenient? It sounds like a philosopher justifying why his job is more important than a farmer's job. Oh, my reading implies a higher pleasure than your tasty lunch.
It is definitely open to pervasive elitism. Mill anticipates this.
He sees that coming.
He does. He asks, how do we prove it? How do we prove poetry is better than pushpin?
The competent judge.
Exactly. He says that if you want to know which of two pleasures is better, you ask someone who has experienced both.
Ah, so you can't just have an opinion. You need to have lived it.
Right. You can't ask the pig because the pig has never read Socrates. But Socrates has eaten lunch. And Mill claims that anyone who is capable of enjoying both poetry and pushpin, or high art and reality TV, will consistently prefer the higher pleasure.
So if you prefer reality TV, Mill would say, well, you just haven't truly experienced the joy of Shakespeare yet, or you're broken.
Essentially, yes. He says you might have lost the capacity for the higher pleasure, like a muscle that has atrophied. It saves utilitarianism from being a philosophy for swine, but it introduces this tricky layer of judgment.
Okay, so we have the foundation. We want to maximize happiness, minimize pain, we count everyone equally, and maybe we prioritize the good stuff like art and science and justice.
That's the framework.
Now let's get to the main event, the split, act versus rule.
This is where the rubber meets the road. Because agreeing on maximize happiness is easy. Agreeing on how to do it in daily life is incredibly hard.
Let's start with the contender in the red corner. Act utilitarianism, or AU. This is the case-by-case method. Walk me through the mindset of an act utilitarian.
An act utilitarian wakes up in the morning and views every single decision as a fresh calculation.
A blank slate.
Completely. The right action is the one that produces the most good in that specific situation. You look the options in front of you right now and you calculate which one yields the highest net happiness.
The sources use a traffic analogy here that I found really helpful, the yield sign.
Yes. Think of act utilitarianism as a yield sign. When you approach a yield sign, the rule isn't stop.
No, the rule is look.
The rule is use your judgment. You look, is there traffic? Is it dangerous? If it's clear, you keep going. You don't stop just for the sake of stopping. You maximize efficiency.
Because stopping when there's no traffic is a waste of time. It's disutility.
Exactly. Why follow a rule to stop if stopping achieves nothing good in this instance? An act utilitarian wants the flexibility to make the best decision for that specific moment. If breaking a rule produces more happiness right now, break the rule.
Okay, now in the blue corner. Rule utilitarianism, or RU, the code of conduct method.
Rule utilitarianism takes a step back. It says, human beings are terrible at calculating consequences on the fly.
That's probably true.
We are biased, we are rushed, we are often wrong. So instead of judging each act, we should judge the rules. An action is right if it conforms to a rule that, if everyone followed it, would maximize good.
And the analogy here is the stop sign.
Precisely. A stop sign doesn't ask for your opinion. It doesn't ask if the road is clear. It says stop, period.
Even if it's 3 a.m., you're in the middle of the desert, and there's not a car for 50 miles.
Even then, in that one instance, yes, it's inefficient. But the rule utilitarian argues that giving drivers the discretion to decide, giving them the yield sign everywhere, leads to chaos.
People are bad drivers.
People misjudge the speed of oncoming cars. They get lazy. They text and drive. The disutility of the accidents caused by human error outweighs the utility of saving a few seconds at a stop sign.
So we follow the rule for the greater good of the system, not the individual moment.
That is the trade-off. Stability versus flexibility.
And it's worth pointing out, these terms are relatively new, right?
That's right. Historically, it is worth noting that while Mill and Bentham danced around these ideas, it was the philosopher Richard Brandt in 1959 who really coined these terms and sharpened the distinction.
Okay, let's apply this back to our drowning dictator. 1938. You save Hitler. How do we judge this?
Let's look at it through the lens of act utilitarianism first. But here, we have a split even within act utilitarianism, as our IEP source points out.
Oh boy, sub-factions, of course.
There is actual consequence utilitarianism and foreseeable consequence utilitarianism.
Break it down. What's the difference?
The actual consequence utilitarian looks at the history books. They have the benefit of hindsight. They say, you saved Hitler. That led to World War II and the Holocaust. Millions died.
The actual result was a catastrophe.
The actual consequence was horrific. Therefore, your act was wrong. End of story.
Wow. So even though I was trying to be a hero, I committed a moral wrong because of how it turned out. I'm morally guilty for World War II because I pulled a guy out of a river?
Yes, because for them, the rightness is objective. It depends on what actually happened. It's a harsh standard. It says morality is about results, not efforts.
That seems incredibly unfair. How can I be responsible for things I can't know?
That is exactly the objection, and it's a powerful one. So most act utilitarians pivot to the foreseeable consequence view.
Okay, this sounds more reasonable.
They say, in 1938, you couldn't possibly know he would become a genocidal dictator. The expected utility of saving a drowning man is high.
Right. 99.9% of the time, you save a drowning person, you've done a good thing.
You save a life, you prevent grief for their family, you've created a lot of happiness. Therefore, based on the information you had, the act was right.
That feels a lot fairer. It judges the betting odds, not the result of the roulette spin.
It does. It distinguishes between evaluating the act, which turned out bad, and evaluating the agent, the person who did it, who tried to do good.
So where does the rule utilitarian stand on saving Hitler? They're not looking at this one case, are they?
No. The rule utilitarian doesn't look at Hitler specifically. They zoom out, they ask, what rule are we following here?
The rule is save drowning people.
The rule is save drowning people. Now, compare two worlds. World A, where we follow that rule. World B, where we follow a rule like only save drowning people if you have done a background check and certified they aren't future dictators.
World B is a nightmare. Lifeguards would need crystal balls. People would drown while you Googled them.
Exactly. The background check rule would lead to massive loss of life, massive disutility. The save everyone rule, while it occasionally saves a bad guy, saves millions of good people.
So the rule is good, even if this one application of it was terrible.
Precisely. So the rule utilitarian says, follow the rule, save the man. The fact that it turned out to be Hitler is a tragic anomaly, a statistical outlier, but the rule itself is sound. You did the right thing by sticking to the code.
This distinction seems manageable when we talk about traffic lights or drowning men. But Section 3 is where things get dark.
They do.
This is the trouble with act utilitarianism. Because when you strictly follow the logic of maximize happiness in this specific case, you end up in some terrifying places.
You really do. This is the wrong answers objection. Critics argue that act utilitarianism justifies actions that seem intuitively evil as long as the math works out.
Let's look at scenario A, the judge. This one is a classic in the literature.
It is. So imagine a judge in a town on the verge of a violent riot. A terrible crime has been committed. Maybe a child was killed. The public is angry. They are a mob, and they want blood.
And they have a suspect.
They believe a certain person did it. Let's say a drifter who just came to town.
But the judge has seen the evidence. He knows the drifter is innocent.
Correct. But the judge also knows that if he doesn't convict someone today, the riot will start. Shops will be burned, people will be beaten, dozens might die. He cannot catch the real killer in time.
So the act utilitarian calculation is convict one innocent man, ruin one life to stop a riot that will ruin many lives.
One life lost versus dozens of lives lost.
The math says do it. Frame the innocent man. Execute him if you have to.
The math says do it.
Which is repulsive. I mean, that violates everything we think about justice. If a moral theory tells you to frame an innocent man, isn't the theory broken?
That is the argument. It suggests that act utilitarianism fails to respect the rights of the individual. The individual just becomes a resource to be used for the herd.
And it gets worse.
It does. Then you have scenario B, the transplant doctor. This is the one that makes me never want to go to a hospital again.
Walk us through it.
You are a brilliant surgeon. You have 5 patients dying of organ failure. 1 needs a heart, 1 needs a liver, 2 need kidneys, 1 needs lungs.
A terrible day at the office.
They will all die today without a transplant.
And you have no organs in the fridge.
None. But you have a young man in the waiting room. He's just there for a checkup. He is healthy, and miraculously, he is a perfect tissue match for all 5 dying patients.
Uh-oh. I see where this is going.
Act utilitarianism says,
Kill the healthy guy, harvest his organs, save the 5.
5 saved, 1 died. Net gain of 4 lives, the math says cut him open.
That is the stuff of horror movies. It turns doctors into monsters. And this is where the undermining trust objection comes in, right? Because surely even a utilitarian can see that this is a bad idea in the long run.
Exactly, and this is where the defender of act utilitarianism has to start thinking about the ripple effects, the social cost.
Right, it's not just about the 5 lives versus the 1.
The calculation often forgets these ripple effects. If we lived in a society where judges framed innocents and doctors harvested healthy people, nobody would trust the legal system. Nobody would walk into a hospital.
The fear alone would create massive disutility. I would live in constant terror that I might be harvested for the greater good.
Precisely. The total amount of fear and anxiety in society would skyrocket, likely outweighing the good of saving those 5 lives.
So even an act utilitarian might argue against it, but they have to do these complex mental gymnastics to get there. They have to prove that the secrecy wouldn't hold, or that the fear would be too great.
They have to argue, well, if people found out, it would be bad.
But a non-utilitarian just says, it's wrong to kill innocent people, full stop. They don't need to calculate the ripple effects.
Right. It's a much more robust defense of rights. But there is another problem with act utilitarianism beyond the horror scenarios.
And what's that?
It's the too demanding objection.
This is the Peter Singer stuff. And this hits close to home for anyone with a bank account.
Yes. Peter Singer is a famous contemporary utilitarian. He follows the logic of impartiality to its uncomfortable conclusion.
Okay, so what does he argue?
He argues that if we truly believe that every life counts equally, that a child in a developing nation matters just as much as my child, then buying a latte is a moral failure.
Because that $5 could have bought medicine, could have bought a malaria net.
Exactly. If you are strictly calculating the most good you can do with your resources, then almost every luxury is immoral. You should be living at a subsistence level and donating the rest.
So buying a new coat when your old one is just okay.
You are choosing your fashion over someone else's starvation.
Sounds noble, but it also sounds impossible for 99.9% of humans. It turns life into a constant guilt trip.
It requires us to treat strangers exactly the same as our own family. If I have $100 and I spend it on a birthday gift for my daughter, instead of saving a stranger's life, utilitarianism says I did something wrong.
Wow.
My daughter's happiness does not mathematically outweigh a stranger's life.
But human nature is built on partiality. We love our tribe, our family. We aren't wired to be impartial, calculating machines.
Exactly. So utilitarianism seems to demand that we become moral saints or robots, stripping away our humanity, our loves, and our personal projects in the name of the greater good.
It's a theory for angels, not humans.
That's a great way to put it.
So utilitarianism is looking a bit shaky. It turns us into organ-harvesting robots who can't buy coffee without having a nervous breakdown. Section 4. Rule utilitarianism to the rescue.
This is where rule utilitarianism steps in and says, relax, we can fix this.
So how does RU handle the transplant doctor? Let's go back to that.
It looks at the rule. It doesn't look at the single case. It asks, what rule should doctors follow?
Option A. Kill healthy patients whenever it saves more lives.
Option B. Never kill healthy patients for organs.
We compare the two worlds that would result from these rules.
In World A, the harvesting world, as we discussed, trust evaporates. The healthcare system collapses because everyone is terrified. Total happiness plummets.
Right.
In World B, our world mostly, people trust doctors, they get treated, they get cured, total happiness is much higher.
So the rule utilitarian says, follow Rule B. Never kill the patient.
Exactly.
But not because killing is inherently wrong in a cosmic sense. No divine command.
No, but because the rule against killing produces the best result for society.
So it aligns with our gut morality, our intuition that killing is wrong, but it justifies it with utilitarian logic.
It saves the theory from being a monster. It allows for rights, it allows for justice, because those things create a stable, happy society.
And this brings us back to Mill's nautical almanac metaphor, which I thought was brilliant. It explains why we rely on rules.
It is Mill's way of explaining why we shouldn't calculate everything from scratch. He says sailors don't calculate the position of the stars using raw trigonometry every time they need to navigate.
That would be insane.
That would take too long, and they'd make mistakes in the middle of a storm.
They use a book of pre-calculated charts.
The almanac. Moral rules, don't steal, don't lie, keep your promises, are the almanac. They are the pre-calculated wisdom of humanity.
So they're shortcuts.
They're shortcuts that have been proven to work. We know from centuries of experience that these rules generally lead to happiness. So, in the heat of the moment, you don't do the math, you trust the book.
So we are sailing through life using our little book of rules, and everything is great. But wait, Section 5, deep theory.
Review.
The sources say this is where things get slippery. Because if the rules are just shortcuts to happiness, shouldn't we break them when we know a shortcut is wrong?
This is where the house of cards starts to wobble. We call it the collapse and the problem of rule worship.
Let's start with rule worship. This is the devil's advocate moment. Suppose I am in a situation where breaking the rule definitely, 100%, yields better results.
The classic lying to the murderer scenario.
Right.
Murderer knocks on your door holding an axe and asks, "Is your friend hiding in here?" You were hiding him in the closet. The rule in the almanac says, don't lie.
If I follow the rule, my friend dies. That's a terrible result.
Right. So JJC Smart, a hardcore utilitarian, looks at the rule utilitarian and says, if you tell the truth here, just to follow the rule, you are irrational.
He calls it real worship.
You are worshiping the rule. You are putting the method above the goal, saving a life.
It's like stopping at that stop sign at 3 a.m. when your passenger's bleeding out. It's madness. It defeats the whole point of utilitarianism, which is to create good outcomes.
So the rule utilitarian says, okay, you're right. We need to fix a rule.
An amendment.
The rule shouldn't be don't lie. That's too blunt. It should be don't lie
Yeah,
unless it saves a life.
that seems reasonable. We add an exception clause.
But then someone says, what if lying prevents a massive financial crash? Okay, update the rule. Don't lie unless it saves a life or prevents a crash.
And unless it protects a surprise party, and unless it spares someone's feelings.
Exactly. And this is the collapse objection proposed by David Lyons.
Okay, what's the argument?
If you keep adding exceptions to the rule to maximize utility in every specific case, your rule eventually just becomes don't lie unless lying produces more happiness.
But that's just act utilitarianism. Do what produces more happiness.
Boom. The rules have collapsed into the act. If your rules are perfect utility maximizers, they cease to be rules and just become instructions to be an act utilitarian.
So rule utilitarianism fails to be a distinct theory. It eats itself.
It eats itself.
So we're back to square one. We either have rule worship, blindly following bad rules, or collapse, no rules at all, just chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way out?
There is, and this is where Brad Hooker comes in. This was one of the densest parts of our source stack, but also the most rewarding.
I agree.
Hooker defends rule utilitarianism by bringing in psychology and economics. He changes the game.
The internalization argument.
Yes. Hooker says, stop thinking about rules as just abstract words on a page. Think about them as things that have to be learned and internalized by actual human brains.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does it matter that we have to learn them?
Because teaching a rule costs something. It costs time, effort, and mental energy.
It's a resource.
It's a resource. If the rule is don't lie, that is easy to teach a child. It is easy to internalize. It sticks.
But if the rule is don't lie, except in cases A, B, C, D, E, followed by a 50-page manual of exceptions.
That is incredibly expensive to teach. No child could learn it. And more importantly, humans are bad at handling complexity.
We get confused.
If you give people a rule with 50 exceptions, they will mess it up. They will start making exceptions where they shouldn't. They will bias the exceptions in their favor. Oh, I can lie because it saves me from embarrassment.
So a rule like never lie might be suboptimal in the murderer case, but it is optimal for the human brain.
Hooker argues for an optimal code. The optimal code isn't the one that gets the utility math right in every single theoretical millisecond. It is the code that produces the best results given the limitations of human beings.
That is such a cool pivot. It's like saying the best software isn't the one with the most features. It's the one that doesn't crash the computer.
Perfect analogy. Hooker suggests the optimal code is one that is simple enough to be internalized by the vast majority of people. He suggests 90% without breaking their brains or costing too much to teach.
So this prevents the collapse. We can't have the don't lie unless XYZ rule because we are too stupid, or rather, too cognitively limited to learn it.
Limited is the polite term. The costs of internalization put a cap on how complex the rules can be. This saves rule utilitarianism.
So we follow simpler rules not because we worship them,
but because a society that tries to follow the perfect complex rules actually ends up worse off due to confusion and error.
That makes so much sense. It grounds morality in biology almost.
Yeah.
Our ethics have to fit our hardware. If we were supercomputers, maybe we could be act utilitarians.
Perhaps.
But since we are messy primates, we need simple rules.
Exactly. And this leads us perfectly into Section 6 and the work of R.M. Hare. Because even if we have these simple internalized rules, we still run into conflicts.
Right. Sometimes don't lie conflicts with protect your friend.
Yeah.
What do we do then?
Hare proposes a solution that bridges the gap between act and rule. He calls it the two levels of moral thinking.
Level 1, the intuitive level.
This is daily life. This is the autopilot. This is where we use the simple rules Hooker was talking about. Don't lie, keep promises, be kind.
The nautical almanac.
It's the almanac in action. We use these because, as we established, we are biased and bad at calculating. Hare calls this the prole thinking, not in a derogatory way, but meaning the everyday human experience.
And it protects us from ourselves.
Right. Relying on intuition prevents us from making self-serving errors, like the adulterer convincing themselves that their affair is for the greater good because it makes them happy. The intuitive level says, no. Adultery breaks the rule. Don't do it.
But then there's level 2, the critical level, the archangel.
This is the superhero mode. We only go here when the rules conflict.
Only in an emergency.
When don't lie fights save a life. In these rare, calm moments of reflection, we step out of the rules and act like act utilitarians. We calculate the utility directly to figure out which rule should win.
So in the murder at the door scenario, my intuitive level screams, don't lie, but my critical level kicks in and says, wait, in this specific extreme case, saving a life outweighs telling the truth.
Precisely. The archangel, critical, selects the best rule for the prole, intuitive to follow. It's a hybrid system. It acknowledges that rules are necessary, but they aren't absolute.
But Hare also deals with a scary edge case, the fanatic.
Yes, the utilitarian nightmare. What about the Nazi who is a true believer? The fanatic says, I want to exterminate a minority group.
Okay.
And I am so committed to this rule that even if I turned out to be a member of that group, I would still say exterminate me.
Because usually you defeat prejudice by saying, how would you like it if it happened to you? But the fanatic says, I wouldn't like it, but I would accept it because it's the right thing.
Hare uses his concept of universal prescriptivism here. He argues that the fanatic is suffering from a failure of imagination.
What does that mean?
If they truly vividly imagined the suffering of the victim, if they fully internalize that experience, they couldn't possibly prescribe the rule.
So the fanatic isn't a counter-argument to utilitarianism. He's just someone who is bad at critical thinking.
Essentially, Hare argues that true critical thinking requires perfect empathy. If you had perfect empathy, you couldn't be a Nazi because you would feel the pain of the victims as your own. You couldn't will that pain.
That brings us to Section 7, justice and rights. Because for a lot of people, this is still the sticking point. Utilitarianism feels like it treats people as containers of happiness, not as individuals with rights.
Mill fights hard on this. He devotes the final chapter of his book, Utilitarianism, to it. He asks, is justice a separate thing from utility? Or is it just a subset?
And he concludes it's just super utility.
Security, that is the word he uses. He says that justice is the name we give to the moral rules that protect our most vital interest. Security.
Security from being killed, from being robbed, from being silenced.
Right. Mill says that while generosity is nice, security is essential. You can live without generosity. You cannot live without security.
If you don't have security, you have nothing because you're constantly afraid of losing everything.
Exactly. Therefore, the rules of justice rights are the most sacred part of the utilitarian code.
So punishing an innocent person to stop a riot isn't just bad math. It's a violation of the fundamental rule of security.
And without security, total happiness collapses.
So a rule utilitarian defends rights not because they are God-given or natural. Mill didn't believe in abstract natural rights.
No, but because they are the absolute most efficient way to organize a happy society.
Which is a very pragmatic way to look at human rights. It's justice as a utility maximization strategy.
It is. It strips away the mysticism of rights and grounds them in human well-being.
So let's bring it all home. We have covered a massive amount of ground. We have act utilitarianism.
Flexible but dangerous.
Dangerous and prone to justifying horrors. Then we have rule utilitarianism.
Stable, trustworthy, but risks becoming rigid rule worship.
And we have the synthesis, the idea that we need rules for our daily lives because we aren't smart enough to calculate everything.
But we need utility to check the rules every now and then to make sure they are actually working.
It's like the autopilot and the pilot. You stay on autopilot rules 99% of the time to avoid fatigue and error.
But when the storm hits, critical conflict, you grab the stick, utility.
That is the best way to live as utilitarian. It allows you to function in the real world without losing sight of the ultimate goal, a better life for everyone.
A very good summary.
So here's my final thought, and it's something that stuck with me from the Hooker reading.
Okay.
We talked about internalization costs. The idea that our moral code is limited by how much we can teach and learn.
Yes.
Doesn't that mean our morality is basically held hostage by our stupidity? Like, if we were super intelligent AI, could we ditch rule utilitarianism and just be act utilitarians? Are we settling for good enough rules just because we aren't smart enough to handle the best actions?
That is a profound question. It really is. Mill actually suggests that we are still learning morality. The code isn't finished.
It's a work in progress.
As we get smarter, as we get more empathetic, maybe the rules can get more complex. Maybe we can handle more nuance. But for now, we are imperfect creatures, and imperfect creatures need stop signs, not just yield signs.
We need the stop signs. I like that. We're going to leave it there. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through the calculus of good.
My pleasure. It was a great conversation.
And thank you to you, the listener, for diving deep. Remember, we didn't just read the encyclopedia today. We took apart the engine of ethics. Go out there, maximize some happiness, and maybe follow a few rules while you're at it. See you on the next deep dive.